Hello there, Talking Fight fans. Welcome once again to another episode of The Scoop featuring champ Bola Ray, who's continuing his ongoing exploration of all those fighters who surrounded Muhammad Ali and who made Muhammad Ali the greatest fighter that ever was. I might be just stretching it a bit there, but who do you got lined up tonight for us, champ?
You are not alone in that assumption of the man. Like, at the end of the day, he's called the greatest to me, and many alike, still to this day. But well, today I'm talking about a little well-known fighter by the name of, or at least whose biological father's name was Leroy Moorhead. Grew up in his own words, as a troubled child, and dropped out of school at the age of 15, only to take up mugging people as a profession. His life did a complete 180, all because he saw a commercial for the Job Corps. It was a volunteer program which aimed at teenage kids to give them vocational training, and somehow boxing was the result for this guy. My name is Bola Raymond Olubuwale, and this is The Scoop. Born January 10th, 1969 in Marshall, Texas, but eventually moved to Houston, Texas, was none other than Big George Edward Foreman. To say that this guy had a troubled youth was an understatement. There are a number of stories about what transpired with this guy, but none tickled me as much as apparently George used to charge people a premium to walk on the same side of the street as him. Yeah. Yeah.
A mob of one.
Right? If with a history like this, I assumed that he had some run-ins with the police, but I couldn't find anything. But after he had dropped out of school at the age of 15, like I said, he saw a commercial for the Job Corps and asked his mother if she would allow him to join, of which she did. While there, George got to know a counselor that really resonated with him by the name of Charles Doc Brodus, a former Air Force sergeant who mentored him and actually got him into boxing. And the rest was history. He really gravitated to this sport with his monstrous, wild swinging punches. He had an amateur career for under 2 years and amassed a pretty good record of 22 wins and 2 losses. Now, his first fight was January 26th, 1967, only to go on to win the San Francisco Examiner Golden Gloves Junior Division and the Las Vegas Golden Gloves Senior Division, both in the month of February. The following year, he won the San Francisco Examiner Golden Gloves Senior Division, the U.S. Nationals, and yeah, for good measure, he threw in the Mexico City Olympic gold medal, just for giggles. He finished his amateur career with a record of 22-4, and then he turned pro later on that year. Now, his career, at least at the beginning, actually right through, was nothing shy of legendary, especially by today's standards. You're going to be hard pressed to find another fighter who has had a better record than him, with the exception of Deontay Wilder. Mike Tyson had the exact same record as him after he lost to Evander Holyfield. Or before he lost to Evander Holyfield, sorry. George it wasn't so much that his record was 40 fights with 40 wins and 37 knockouts, but who these wins were against that made him legendary. Nothing shy of legendary. You have to see, he didn't just beat, but he stopped Ken Norton, a juggernaut of the time, who not just beat Muhammad Ali, but broke his jaw in the second round. And George took him out in 2 rounds. Like, just annihilated him. George Chavello, the Canadian. Yeah, most people don't realize that, George got stopped. Chavello got stopped a few times. Once by Edward Foreman via a 3rd round merciless pounding in the corner. And finally, the ref had seen enough and stopped the fight. This is the same guy that went 15 rounds twice with Ali. And most notably, the Sunshine Showdown against Joe Frazier. The man who broke Ali's jaw in the 15th round, the world champion, undefeated, and completely destroyed by this juggernaut. He dropped Joe Frazier 6 times in 2 rounds when Joe accidentally had touched canvas once prior to this point in his career. It was beyond believable. That was the magnitude of this guy. And yet, he goes up against the greatest, and, well, the rest was history. Now, to quote Mike Orr, the man was a beast. He goes up against the greatest, and some believe the fight would have cemented him as the greatest himself. Or more importantly, this is the fight that cemented Ali as the greatest. Because most people saw Ali dying in this fight. Wow. October 30th, 1974, the Rumble in the Jungle. The most anticipated contest in sporting history to date. George was a 3-1 favorite, being 6 years younger and having crushing wins over 2 people that not just beat Ali but broke his jaw. George said in an interview that when he went up against both Frazier and Norton, he was actually nervous. But then when he got up against Ali, they had beaten Ali. Actually, and by this point in time, Ali hadn't avenged these losses yet. So what did he have to worry about? The fight starts out with Ali moving, but more importantly, doing something that just was not done. In that he was throwing what are known as cross leads. Cross lead. When you're standing in an orthodox stance, as Ali did, which meant his right hand was further back and his left hand was in front. His right hand is seen as a cross, and he was able to throw this first. Now, this wasn't done simply because it was seen as, well, your opponent would have more time to see it coming and be able to administer their own offense, like counter punch offense. It's almost deemed suicidal. Ali threw a cross lead 12 times in the first round and landed. Unheard of. The second round begins, and something happens. Ali sees something partway through the fight and decides that he's going to lay up on the ropes and let Foreman swing for the fence on his body. If anybody was not convinced that Ali was on a suicide path after throwing cross leads in the first round, now it's cemented in him going off and laying on the ropes against arguably the hardest punching man ever to lace up gloves. George went to work swinging for the fence on every punch, but what wasn't expected is that all these punches were ineffective because they were bouncing off his arms. A couple shots caught him in the head, but they didn't rock him at all. Yeah, he just took these punches and he'd give little pot shots in between, pot shots and talking to him, pot shots and talking to him, little quick shots here and there. And it just looked like suicide. Round 3 starts. He goes right back to the ropes, calls him over, lets the fight go on. This continues on, and it was pretty much around, for the next 5 rounds, that's all you saw. This was totally Muhammad Ali's idea. This is another sign of his greatness. For me, it's one thing for an athlete to prep for a fight and dive for the plan the dive for the plan. It's another thing to be in the thick of the fight, recognize that whatever strategy that you've been working on, what you've been training for, isn't working, change directions partway through the fight and come back. I can only count like 3 people who's ever done anything remotely close to that successfully. Lennox Lewis, Roy Jones Jr., and Muhammad Ali. Excuse me. Wow. Okay. It was so bad. Um, it was so one-sided in thinking that Ali's trainer, the legendary Angelo Dundee, had no idea what Ali was doing. He was outside the ring as Ali is laying up against the ropes, smacking Ali on the ass, telling him, "Move!" This was suicide. And nothing. Ali continued to trash talk George, enraging the man, calling him a sissy. Is that all you got, George? George let off a furious flurry, tagged him with a huge shot in the head, and goes, and yeah, that's all you got. And George said in a post-fight interview that that's when he knew that he was in. He underestimated this guy, and he was in for some serious trouble. All these punches that George was throwing, and actually George was known for this in the amateurs, but for the most part, he just zapped his energy. That's all. Ali had nothing to worry about. He was completely safe. He was able to take the punches that was coming. George expended all his energy. By the 7th round, Ali picked up the pace, picked him apart, and George barely had anything left to, well, he didn't really have much of a defense, but his punches, so much as his jab wasn't any more effective than anything by this point in time. Goes into the 8th round. George, lumbering forward, tries to pin Ali up against the ropes, and Ali caught him with 5 swinging rights, swung him around, caught him with an uppercut, which set up a beautiful cross, and down goes George. George hits the ground for the first time in his career and can't make the count. This fight shows that Ali was capable of taking a punch and highlights his tactical genius, changing his fight style by adopting the rope-a-dope, which is what all of that was actually end up being called, instead of his former style of emphasizing movement and countering his opponents. This fight cemented him as the greatest. If him beating Sonny Liston wasn't bad enough, this fight cemented him as the greatest. Foreman continued on with his career, but pestered Ali for a rematch that just never came. Even though Ali said that that was a fight that he wanted before he retired. Foreman retired after a fight with Jimmy Young in 1977. And legend has it that it was a bad beating. He lost the fight, and then he went into the locker room, and apparently Christ appeared to him. And he became not just saved, he became a preacher man. He not only became a preacher, but became really good friends with Muhammad Ali post 1981 when Ali retired. And not just really good friends, but best of friends. While on his life journey as a preacher, story has it that George wanted to raise money. Now, for either repairs to his church or to build a community center or something of that nature. So the result was that he returned back to the ring after 10 years of not being in his office. Now, again, George put together an impressive string of fights in that 28 wins, 2 losses, only to go up against big Michael Moore. November 5th, 1994, for Michael Moore's not just WBA, IBF world titles, but also the lineal champion. George made history that night. Not just by his 10th round knockout of Michael Moore, but also being the oldest world champion in history at age 45. He actually amassed 3 records that night. The oldest champion, the largest amount of time between 2 world championship fights, which was 20 years.
Wow.
And the greatest amount age difference in a title fight that you're successful with in 19 years 19 years senior to that of Michael Moore. That means that you could probably get in there and start beating up some people. It's not over for you.
It's not over. Yep.
Oh. George went on to have one real title defense after winning that title the second time, and upon having that title defense, or actually before the title defense, because he went and chose the fight that he did choose, the WBC or the WBA stripped him of the title. So he had the IBF. And then he went on to fight Alex Schultz, of which it was a controversial win for George. And then they made Alex Schultz a mandatory rematch. At which point in time, George didn't like the way the IBF was treating the American greats. He was already a mandatory rematch against Michael Schultz. Meanwhile, Alex Schultz. Michael Moore was not even in the rankings. Michael Moore did him the favor by giving him a title shot, especially after he had just lost a fight to Tommy Morrison prior to that fight. He got the title shot. Sorry, to Evander Holyfield. He got a title shot. And he couldn't repay the favor by giving him a rematch title shot. Not only him, but Riddick Bowe. Both guys were decent American fighters, and yet they were nowhere close to being on the radar for the IBF. So that left a bad taste in his mouth, and he said no, which ended up the IBF stripped him of his title. So be it. He went on. George continued on with his career until an incredibly sorry, controversial loss to Shannon Briggs, November 22nd, 1997. George left boxing, but he actually made far more money as an entrepreneur. The Foreman Grill, he made his hundreds of millions of dollars with the Foreman Grill. More money than all the money he made in boxing in 3 decades of boxing combined. Good for you, my man. Good for you. Now, this father of 12, 12. In today's day, and you know what? You're gonna spend all that money. 5 boys. 5 boys named George Edward Foreman, 5 daughters, and then 2 adopted daughters. Has given history a great deal to be thankful for, and his kids even more to be proud of. Thanks for the memory, sir. That's my episode on Big George Foreman. If you like this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the notification bell. It's your boy Bola, and that's the scoop.
Thanks very much, Champ. That was an awesome story. I mean, George, wow. What a great fighter. What a great memory. And the comeback, too. Amazing. And more importantly, the money he made off the Foreman grill. There's one in my cupboard. It's a great machine.
Mine too, yeah.
I mean, it's a household item. I mean,
exactly.
Selling those millions around the world. That's amazing stuff. Really is. Thanks very much again. And thanks very much, good viewership, for tuning in this evening. And we'll see you tomorrow night.
Cheers.
Thank you.